moment I stepped through their front door, I knew I'd made either the best decision of my life or the kind of mistake you spend years trying to explain to a therapist. My boyfriend's mother looked at me the way you look at a stain on a white tablecloth. Her eyes moved from my clearance rack dress to my drugstore flats to my hair, which I'd pulled back because it was raining and I hadn't planned around the rain, and I watched her do the math. I watched her add me up and come to a number she didn't like. She leaned toward her son and whispered something she thought I couldn't hear. She said I looked like someone who wandered in from the parking lot. I smiled, and I thought, this is going to be a very long evening. My name is Claire, I'm 31 years old, I'm a licensed anesthesiologist, and for the 14 months I've been dating the man I thought I was going to marry, I let him believe I was a medical billing assistant who was still paying off student loans. I knew to explain that. Not because I expect you to immediately agree with me, I know how it sounds. I know the version of this story where I'm the villain, but hear me out, because my grandmother taught me something that changed the way I see people, and once I tell you what she told me, I think you'll understand why I did what I did. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. She lived in a small house in rural Tennessee, drove a truck that made a sound like a coffee grinder when you turned left, and bought her clothes at the same consignment shop where she'd been shopping since 1987. She clipped coupons on Sundays. She packed her own lunch for church potlucks. She never once complained about any of it. She also died leaving behind a paid-off property, 2 investment accounts, and a life insurance policy that collectively amounted to just over $2 million. She had never told a single person outside of her attorney. The letter she left me was 4 pages, handwritten, and I've read it so many times the paper's gone soft at the folds. In it, she wrote this: "The only time you see a person's real character is when they believe there's nothing in it for them to be kind to you. Watch how people treat the ones they think don't matter. That's who they are." I was 26 when she died. I was in my 2nd year of residency, running on 4 hours of sleep most nights, eating vending machine sandwiches, and I had her words taped to the inside of my locker at the hospital. So when my boyfriend, I'll call him my boyfriend because that's what I still thought of him as, even when he slipped that ring on my finger, when he mentioned his parents wanted to meet me, and when he mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that his mother was particular about first impressions, I made a decision. I wasn't going to dress up. I wasn't going to mention where I worked or what I did there. I was going to let them fill in the blanks, the same way everyone always does, and I was going to watch what they did with what they assumed. His family lives in a suburb of Charlotte. Old money by way of textile manufacturing, though the manufacturing had long since moved overseas, and what remained was mostly real estate, some commercial property holdings, and a self-image that had never updated itself accordingly. The house was the kind of large that isn't comfortable, too many rooms that nobody uses, furniture chosen to impress rather than to sit on. I drove my 2012 Civic. I wore a dress I'd bought at a Target 2 years before a work Christmas party. I left my good jewelry at home and wore small silver studs that I'd had since college. He met me at the door with a kiss that felt slightly staged, like he was aware of an audience and performing affection for it. His eyes moved over my outfit and I saw it. Just for a second, before he replaced it with the smile, I saw the discomfort, the embarrassment. I filed that away. His mother was stationed in the entryway like a monument to herself. She was in her early 60s, perfectly maintained, wearing something cream-colored and expensive. Her handshake was the kind where only the fingers make contact, a handshake that communicates that the other person's warmth is not necessarily welcome. That was when she made the parking lot comment. She thought I was too far away to hear. She was wrong. His father was warmer, in the way of men who have learned to leave certain things to their wives. He shook my hand firmly and asked about the drive up, and there was nothing unkind in his eyes. Just curiosity and the particular tiredness of someone who had been living alongside his wife for a very long time. Then there was his sister. She arrived late. I'd later learned she always arrived late because she had decided at some point that other people's time was a resource she could spend freely. She walked in wearing a blazer that cost more than my first car and looked at me with the kind of smile that says you're adorable, and I mean that as an insult. She said hi, the way you say it when you don't mean it at all. There was one other person at dinner I hadn't expected, an older woman, maybe late 60s, introduced as a family friend and former business associate of my boyfriend's father. Her name was Mrs. Aldridge. She had sharp eyes and she looked at me from across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not unkind, but searching, like she was trying to remember something. We sat down to dinner. The table was set with more silverware than a meal of 4 courses requires. His mother looked at me examining the place setting and smiled. She said she hoped I was comfortable with formal dining. Her voice had that particular quality, the warmth on the surface, the current running underneath. I said, my grandmother always told me the point of a meal isn't the silverware, it's the people you're eating with. His mother's smile tightened, his sister made a sound into her wine glass. Dinner began. The interrogation was framed as conversation. She asked where I'd grown up. I said Tennessee. She asked about my family. I said my grandmother raised me. She asked what happened to my parents. I said they passed when I was young. She made a sound she intended to be sympathetic and said something about how hard it must have been, growing up without proper guidance. I told her my grandmother gave me everything I needed. His sister asked what I did for work. I said I worked in healthcare. She asked what kind. I said I was in the clinical side of things. Patient care, support for the medical team. She nodded the way you nod when you've decided you already know the answer, and whatever someone says just confirms it. His mother said that was wonderful. She said healthcare workers were so dedicated. She said it the way people say what a good girl to a dog, that's learned to sit. Then his sister said a name. She said it the way you mention the weather, casually, almost accidentally, as if it just came to mind. It was the name of a woman who had apparently dated my boyfriend for 2 years before we met. His mother's face changed. She came alive in a way she hadn't been since I walked in the door. She said this woman was remarkable. She said she came from a good family. She said her father was a developer, that they had property across 3 counties, that she and my boyfriend had always made such natural sense together. I watched my boyfriend's face. Something moved across it and was quickly covered, the way you cover a mess when someone unexpected knocks on your door. His mother looked at me directly. She said she hoped I didn't feel out of place, given my more modest background. She said not everyone was raised with certain advantages. She said there was no shame in a simple life. She called me simple. Not in those exact words, but that was the word underneath all the other words, and we both knew it. Something shifted in me, not breaking, more like a key turning in a lock. I kept my face open and pleasant. I had come here to learn something, and the lesson was becoming very clear. My boyfriend said something weak, something about how his mother didn't mean anything by it. His mother patted his hand and said of course she was only thinking of him. A mother always wants what's best. The unfinished sentence hung over the table, and that's not you. Mrs. Aldridge spoke up then. She said something about how she'd known some remarkable people who'd come from very little, and that in her experience, character was rarely inherited. My boyfriend's mother looked at her the way you look at someone who has embarrassed themselves at a party. Mrs. Aldridge ignored her and looked at me. She asked what my grandmother's name was. I told her. She went quiet for a moment, then she nodded, slowly, and turned back to her food. But I noticed that she spent the rest of dinner watching me with a new kind of attention. After dessert, his mother announced that the men would talk in the study and the rest of us would have coffee in the sitting room. It was said pleasantly, but it was an instruction. I excused myself to find the bathroom. I didn't find it right away because I wasn't really looking. What I found instead was a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. His mother and his sister, in a room with the door not quite fully closed, speaking in the voices people use when they believe they're alone. I stopped walking. His mother was saying that this had gone on long enough. She said my boyfriend was making an emotional decision and it was going to cost him. His sister said she told him from the beginning. She said she'd looked me up and there was nothing there. I didn't even have a LinkedIn, just a basic Facebook that hadn't been updated in 3 years. His mother said that was precisely the problem. She said the family needed an alliance, not a charity case. She said his father's commercial properties in the north part of the county were tied up in a refinancing deal, and the one investor they needed, a man whose daughter happened to be that woman my boyfriend had once dated, had made it quietly clear that family connections mattered to him. His sister laughed. She said it was almost poetic. She said my boyfriend had gone out and found himself a medical receptionist with a Tennessee accent and thought that was love. His mother said love was a luxury. She said my boyfriend needed to understand that some decisions had consequences beyond himself. Then she said something that stopped my breath entirely. She said they'd already spoken to the other woman. She said that she was still interested. She said the plan was to let my boyfriend go through the motions, let him feel like he'd made his own choice, and then, slowly, carefully, make sure circumstances arranged themselves so that I became an inconvenience too significant to ignore. They would find something, a rumor, an incompatibility, something that gave him a reason to walk away that didn't look like what it was. His sister said he was too soft to do it himself. His mother said that was why they were doing it for him. I stood in that hallway for a long time after they stopped talking. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I thought they would be. I thought about walking back in there and saying everything I knew right then in front of everyone. But I thought about my grandmother, and I thought about what she would have done with information like this. She would have used it wisely. She would have been patient. She would have waited until she knew exactly what she was doing and why. I went and found the bathroom. I ran cold water over my wrists. I looked at myself in the mirror above their marble sink, and I made a decision. I went back out to the sitting room. I drank my coffee. I let his mother tell me about the neighborhood association and the new restaurant that had opened near their club. I nodded and smiled and asked polite questions. When my boyfriend walked me to my car, he asked if I was okay. He said his family could be a lot at first, but they'd warm up. I said I understood. He kissed me goodnight. I drove home. I thought about everything I'd learned, not just that night, but in the weeks that followed. Because here's the thing, no one tells you about being in a serious relationship when you have something to protect. You learn to pay attention in ways other people don't bother to. I had spent my career learning to read a room fast, to catch the signs other people missed, to make quick and correct decisions under pressure. I started paying attention to my boyfriend. He checked his phone more carefully when I was around. He'd step out to take calls he used to take in front of me without thinking. Once, I came home early from a shift, and he was just getting off the phone, and the way he said nothing, no one, I'll tell you later, in the 5 seconds before he realized I was there. That was enough. I also started making calls of my own. I have colleagues all over the hospital system, a gastroenterologist who'd grown up in Charlotte, a nurse practitioner who'd worked in the commercial real estate sector before she went back to school, and Mrs. Aldridge, because I'd looked her up after that dinner, and what I found was interesting. She had been a silent partner in a deal with my boyfriend's father 15 years ago. A deal that had ended badly, according to the public records. Not illegally badly, just the kind of badly where someone walks away significantly lighter and the other party doesn't seem to notice, or pretends not to. She had been waiting. I called her. I introduced myself properly, my full name, my position, the hospital where I'd been on staff for 4 years, the department I was about to be promoted within. There was a long pause on her end. Then she laughed quietly and said she thought so. She said she'd recognized my grandmother's name at dinner. She said she'd done business with my grandmother in the early 90s, a small investment in a property deal, and that my grandmother had been one of the most straightforward people she'd ever worked with in 40 years of business. I told her what I'd heard in the hallway. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need?" The engagement party was set for 6 weeks later. My boyfriend's mother had planned it the way generals plan campaigns, guest list curated for maximum social and financial impact, venue chosen to signal status, catering designed to impress people who already had everything. She had no idea what was coming. I didn't tell my boyfriend I knew anything. I gave him the same opportunity I would want someone to give me, a chance to be honest on his own. 2 nights before the party, I asked him if there was anything he wanted to tell me. We were sitting on the couch in his apartment, and I kept my voice even. I said I wanted us to go into this engagement with everything on the table. He said he loved me. He said he couldn't wait to build a life with me. He said there was nothing to tell. I looked at him for a long moment. He held my gaze. I said okay. That was when I stopped wondering whether I was making the right choice. The morning of the party, I went to my actual closet, the one behind a closet where I keep the things that require an occasion. I put on a dress I'd bought at a boutique in Manhattan when I'd attended a cardiology conference the previous spring. I put on the pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Small, real, the kind of thing that only someone who knew quality would recognize. I wore a watch that had been a gift from the department chief after I'd been on staff for 3 years, an edition they only made for physicians. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like exactly who I was. The party was at a country club outside Charlotte, all glass and white tablecloths and small plates of expensive food that people eat 2 bites of and set down. I drove myself. I arrived alone. The valet looked at my car, the same 2012 Civic I'd driven to their house 6 weeks before, and then looked at me and could not reconcile the two things he was seeing. He asked if I was with the event staff. I handed him my keys and walked inside. The first person who noticed me was a woman I didn't know, someone's wife or girlfriend, standing near the entrance. She looked at me and then leaned toward her husband and said something. The second person was my boyfriend's father. He was near the bar, doing the hosting that his wife considered beneath her, welcoming people with the kind of exhausted graciousness of a man who would genuinely rather be home. He saw me and his expression did something complicated. Recognition, then confusion, then something close to alarm. I said it was a beautiful party. He thanked me without quite finding the words. I moved through the room. I introduced myself to people, my full name, my position, my hospital. When someone knew the name, and several people did, because it is one of the larger hospital systems in the region, I watched them recalibrate. I watched them look at my dress and my watch and my grandmother's pearls and try to put together a version of me that matched what they thought they knew. Mrs. Aldridge arrived 40 minutes in. She found me near the garden doors. She handed me a glass of champagne and said, "Ready?" I said I'd been ready for weeks. My boyfriend found me before I found him. He came through the crowd looking for me. His mother had been sending him looks from across the room, and when he reached me, he stopped. He looked at me the way you look at someone you thought you knew, and suddenly aren't sure. He asked where I'd gotten the dress. I told him it was mine. I said I'd had it for a while. He said I looked different. I said I look like myself. He wanted to talk privately. I said later, this was our party, we had guests. I took his arm and walked him toward the group of people I most wanted to meet, a man I'll call the investor, because that's the role he was playing that night. He was the one whose daughter's name had been dropped over dinner 6 weeks ago. He was the reason my boyfriend's mother had engineered all of this. I introduced myself, properly. The investor blinked. He asked if I was with Santa Rafael's, the hospital system. I said I was. He asked if I was the Dr. Sutton who had been part of the perioperative quality initiative that had gotten written up in a regional healthcare journal the year before. I said I was. He shook my hand again, differently this time. My boyfriend stood beside me and said nothing. The evening moved. Word moved faster. I watched people check their phones, confirm things, share what they were finding. The story of who I was spreading through the party like water finding its level. His mother found me 40 minutes before the speeches were scheduled. She pulled me to the edge of the room with a grip that she was trying to make seem casual. She asked what I thought I was doing. I said I was attending my engagement party. She said I knew what she meant. She said the dress, the way I was talking to people, the things I was apparently telling them about my career. She said she wanted to know what my game was. I said I didn't have a game. I said I was just being honest. I said it was something I'd wanted to do all along, but I'd needed to wait until I knew exactly who I was being honest with. Her face went still. I said I heard you, in the hallway, 6 weeks ago. The color left her face slowly, like something being drained. I said I knew about the investor. I knew about his daughter. I knew about the plan to manufacture a reason to end my engagement once the business arrangement had been secured. She said I had no proof of any of that. I held up my phone. I said I hadn't needed to record anyone because her financial records were public. Her husband's refinancing deal was a matter of county record, and the timeline of conversations she'd had with my boyfriend's ex-girlfriend, who, as it turned out, had not been fully informed of the details of this arrangement and was not particularly pleased about it when I'd reached out to her directly, was something she might want to think carefully about. She stared at me. I said, "My grandmother taught me something. She said the only way to know someone's real character is to let them believe there's nothing in it for them to be kind to you. So I gave you that chance, and now I know." I turned and walked toward the small stage the country club had set up for the speeches. The program had called for my boyfriend's mother to speak first, then my boyfriend, then me. She had not made it to the stage. My boyfriend had been directed up there by a member of the event staff, looking confused and a little panicked. He stood at the microphone and said the things he was supposed to say, about love, about the future, about looking forward to everything ahead. Then he looked at me in the front row and extended his hand. I walked up the steps. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms get when everyone senses that something is about to change. I took the microphone. I said I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I said I wanted to thank this family for the opportunity to understand exactly who they were. I said that 6 weeks ago, I had stood in their home wearing borrowed simplicity because I needed to see how they treated someone they believed had nothing to offer. I said I had my answer. I described the dinner, the jokes at my expense, the comments about my background, the careful cruelty packaged as concern. I said his mother had called me simple and meant it as a sentence, not a description. I said I'd heard a conversation in the hallway that I was not supposed to hear. I didn't repeat all of it. I didn't need to. I said enough. I said my boyfriend had been given a chance to tell me the truth and he had chosen not to. I looked at him standing beside me. He had the expression of a man watching something he built fall apart in real time. I had known that man for 14 months. I had thought I loved him. I had thought he loved me back. I think some part of him did, but love that folds under family pressure is not the kind you build a life on. I said, "I'm a physician. I've been on staff at St. Raphael's for 4 years. I make a good living, and I live modestly because my grandmother taught me that the number in your bank account is not the measure of what you're worth. I wanted to marry someone who understood that. Someone who would have defended me at that dinner table, even if he thought I was a billing assistant with nothing to offer." I paused. I said, "He didn't." I slipped the engagement ring off my finger. It was a beautiful ring. He had chosen it carefully, and whatever his failures, he had not chosen it badly. I set it on the podium. I said I hoped he would find someone who made him brave enough to be himself, separate from what his family expected of him. I meant it. I really did. I left the microphone and walked off the stage. The room let me through without a word. I heard his mother's voice starting up behind me, that practiced, carrying voice that had been trained to fill rooms, and I heard it falter. I heard someone else speaking, Mrs. Aldridge, in the calm and certain tone of someone who has been waiting 15 years for a moment to say exactly what she now had permission to say. I kept walking. The valet brought my Civic around and gave me my keys without making eye contact. I got in. I pulled out of the country club parking lot and drove home with the windows down, even though it was cold enough that it didn't make much sense. I stopped at a gas station diner on the way home, the kind that's open all night, and ate eggs and toast at the counter with a cup of coffee that came in a heavy mug that had been washed 1,000 times. The woman working the counter refilled my cup without me asking. We didn't talk much. It was the best meal I'd had in months. I got home around midnight. I changed into sweatpants. I sat on my couch with my grandmother's letter in my lap, the real copy, the soft one, the one I'd read so many times I could recite it, and I read it again anyway. 3 weeks later, a colleague forwarded me a brief item from a local business newsletter. A commercial real estate refinancing deal in Charlotte had fallen through after the primary investor withdrew. The reasons given were vague. The newsletter moved on after 2 sentences. My boyfriend texted twice in the week after the party, once to say he was sorry, once to say he wished things had been different. I read both messages. I didn't respond to either one. Not because I was angry, by then the anger had mostly burned itself clean, but because there was genuinely nothing left to say. My grandmother left me a letter and a life lesson and enough money to be comfortable, and more than any of it, she left me a way of seeing people that I will carry for the rest of my life. She was right about almost everything. But here is the thing she didn't say. The part I've had to figure out on my own. Knowing someone's real character doesn't always save you from loving them anyway. It just means you go in with your eyes open. It means you know when to walk away. I walked away. And the morning after, I made coffee and went to work and put a difficult 12-hour day behind me and drove home in my Civic and let myself into my apartment that is small and mine and thought, this is enough. This is enough. This is exactly the life I want. I still have my grandmother's letter on the nightstand, not as a reminder to be angry at anyone, just as a reminder of what I almost missed. What I almost missed was this. The people who treated me worst at that dinner table did so freely, without hesitation, because they believed there was no cost to it. That's not cruelty in the extraordinary sense. That's just who they were when they thought the math was in their favor. His mother didn't become unkind the night I walked through her door. She'd always been that way. She just finally had a reason to show me. That's the thing about character. It doesn't form in the big moments. It forms in the small ones, the ones you think nobody important is watching. I had a chance to see his family in one of those moments, and I took it. Not out of cleverness exactly. More out of a lesson my grandmother had pressed into me so many times it had become instinct. She called it simply paying attention. I think now it was something closer to moral clarity. The habit of seeing people as they actually are, not as they present themselves, and then being honest about what you see. I think about my boyfriend sometimes, not with bitterness. I think he genuinely cared about me in the way that people care about things they haven't been taught to protect. Nobody had ever asked him to be braver than his family needed him to be, and so he wasn't. That's a quiet kind of tragedy, and I feel it, but I don't carry it. What I carry instead is something I had to earn the hard way, the knowledge that my own judgment is trustworthy. I spent years doubting myself, wondering if I was too guarded, too slow to open up, too careful about who I let in. Sitting at that dinner table and watching everything confirm exactly what I'd suspected, that was hard. But it also settled something in me. I trusted what I saw, I thought it through, and then I didn't flinch when it was time to act. I think that's what my grandmother was actually teaching me. Not just how to see people, but how to trust what you see. How to hold on to your own read of a situation even when someone very confident is telling you you're wrong. How to gather information quietly and then use it wisely, without letting anger turn it into something ugly. There's a particular kind of strength in that, not the kind that makes noise, but the kind that holds steady. I also think about Mrs. Aldridge sometimes, a woman who had been wronged 15 years before I ever came along, who kept her patience and waited, and when the moment came, stepped forward without any drama at all. She didn't need the world to know she was right, she just needed it to be true. I want to be that kind of person. The eggs I ate at that diner on the way home cost $6. The coffee came in a thick, heavy mug. The woman who poured it didn't ask my name or my job title or where I'd gone to school. She just poured the coffee. I left her a 40% tip and drove home in the dark, and I thought, this is what it feels like to be exactly who you are, with nothing to perform and no one to convince. I'm still learning how to live there, but I'm getting better at it every day.